When Gilhooly Was in Flower by L. Ron Hubbard. Jigsaw Gilhooly was 1,000 miles deep in thought, which fact was not particularly endearing him to Marianne Marlowe. He sat on her front porch, looked off into the purple expanses, and gnawed upon a wheat straw. He looked idiotic when he sat like that, thought Marianne. His eyes got out of focus, and he was limp enough normally, but now... Apparently, he was a sober-faced, gangling, walking stick of a puncher without any sense of humor. But Gilhooly had ideas. He had big ideas. And right now, he was wondering just how to get around to fixing life so that he could ask Marianne to be his forevermore. It all required considerable logic, and when it came to mathematical reasoning, Jigsaw Gilhooly was aces up, though sometimes the least bit slow. Disgustedly, Marianne, who taught school to the 3 kids in Gunpowder Gulch, picked up her copy of Ivanhoe and tried to read to get her mind off the way Gilhooly looked when he was jigsawing. Most of the men in the Painted Buttes country had told her she was beautiful. She believed them a little, and therefore it grieved her that Gilhooly paid such scant attention. Most of the men in the Painted Buttes country had told her that she was a fool for seeing anything in Jigsaw Gilhooly, as he had neither looks, nor fortune, nor reputation. And brunette little Marianne was beginning to believe them, a little. Gilhooly sat and chewed his straw and focused his eyes on the back of his head, thus circumnavigating the globe with a blink. His problem was somewhat complex. He had 300 acres of his own and a square mile of range rented. He had 40 head of cattle. He had a house which could stand both straightening and improvement. Several gentlemen had lately offered him a fancy price, and he thought maybe he ought to sell and get another place before he asked Marianne. And that was not all. These gentlemen were sheep men. If sheep got a foothold on the Painted Buttes range, there wouldn't be any stopping them. Now it was either asking Marianne to marry on $2 and staying loyal to his own kind, or it was asking Marianne to marry on $1,500 and going in debt for a place good enough for her. So the problem shifted back and forth, and so did the straw, and Gilhooly kept his eyes on the back of his head via China.
Stop it!
Gilhooly looked at her in astonishment.
Stop looking like a shorthorn, Jigs Gilhooly. Sometimes I think you are a fool, and other times I'm certain of it.
Ma'am?
Said the startled Gilhooly.
Why don't you be a man?
Demanded Marianne, brown eyes flashing.
Why do you have to sit and moan about some crazy problem when you rode 15 miles to see me?
That's right.
What's right?
I did ride 15 miles to see you.
She subsided, beaten. Ivanhoe was clutched in her small, desperate hand, and she felt like throwing it at him.
Now, you're mad. I didn't mean anything to do anything. What's wrong?
Oh,
said Marianne in a small voice, and then, sitting up like a cottontail and looking earnestly at him.
The trouble with you, Jigs Gilhooly, is that you aren't romantic.
Me?
You.
But...
He stopped, baffled.
What do you mean, romantic?
Like Brian Dubois Gilbert, or Ivanhoe, or...
Like who? Nobody by their names has sped around here.
Of course they haven't. Their outfits were over in England and France and such.
Foreigners.
Foreigners are not, Jigs Gilhooly. If you ever expect me to pay any attention to any offer you might have to make, you'll have to mend your ways. And that's final.
You mean be romantic? But geez, Marianne, I don't know anything about it.
An inspiration hit her. She closed the book with a thump and handed it to him.
When you've read this, you can come and see me again. And not until...
I want a man with high romance. I want a man who'll take a chance on me. I want a man to sweep me off my horse. I want a guy who's strong and brave, someone who's not afraid to save me. I want a guy to sweep me off my horse. I don't think I should have to settle. I want a man with metal, happily ever after, with Galahad or Lancelot or Ivanhoe. I'm not even sure this guy exists, a guy who's not afraid to use his fists to save me. I want a man with romance and courage and honor and humor and sweetness and chutzpah and cojones. I want a man to sweep me off my horse. Gilhooly was routed. He took the book as though it had a rattler between the covers and held it away from him, looking at it. But when he looked back at Mary Ann, he could see with but half an eye that she meant what she said. This was a new angle to the problem. He hadn't thought about her not wanting to marry him. But the solution was offered. He would have to read this book and be romantic. He tipped his hat.
Yes, ma'am.
And backed off the porch. He climbed his Mustang Calico, tipped his hat again to Mary Ann, and neck-reined away to proceed down the wagon tracks through the sagebrush. When he was a mile or so from the house, still in view behind him, he told Calico,
Make your gopher holes to fall into. I got some studying to do.
And so it was that Jigsaw Gilhooly began to read of the days when knighthood was in flower. 2 bits worth of midnight oil later, Jiggs Gilhooly guided Calico onto the field of honor. Pennons fluttered and queens waved and armor flashed all about him. Mary Ann threw a glove toward him for an amulet, and then, drawing up and lowering the shade of his visor, he glared through the slits at Brian Dubois Gilbert, who stood snorting evilly on the other side of the tilt course. It happened at this time that a gentleman by the name of Fallon, who was known for determination, and his friend Billings Dwight topped the bluff above the Gilhooly Ranch.
What the devil?
Said Fallon thickly, pulling in and staring. Billings Dwight stared too.
He must be plumb loco, Fallon. Maybe I'd better pot-shot him with this sharps, huh?
Put it away.
Below them, in a flat field, Gilhooly sat upon a much-altered calico. A fly net decked the horse, but that was not the most astonishing thing about the ensemble. Gilhooly had a long pine pole in his hand with something which looked like a boxing glove on the far end. He had twisted his holster around so that he could couch this crude lance. On his head he had a water pail with holes in front and something which appeared to be a hearse plume bobbing above it. 30 yards away, a longhorn bull pawed earth and blew, and was not particularly aware that he was no one but Brian Dubois Gilbert. Sir Gilhooly tensed in his saddle and lowered the lance. He jabbed spur to a nervous Calico, and they lunged ahead straight at the Longhorn. Calico's hooves thundered. Sir Gilhooly yelled. The bull started a rolling charge of his own. Two irresistible forces met in mid-flight. The lance hit the bull's shoulder just as the Longhorn swerved. The impact picked Sir Gilhooly out of the saddle like a pebble from a slingshot, and then, like a pole vaulter's pole, it arced Sir Gilhooly through the air. He swooped to a loud landing 30 feet beyond the Longhorn. The bull turned. He saw his man dismounted. He started to charge, horns lowered. But Calico was a trained cow pony, and like all such, riderless or no, he would ride down a bull. He streaked in from the right, shoulder to shoulder with the racing Longhorn. The bull was not bright. He thought this was another rider. He swerved away, and Calico dived in toward Sir Gilhooly, who grabbed the horn and swung aboard. He reached down and scooped up the lance and bucket, then scowled at the bull.
That's only 10 times. But, Sir Brian, we shall meet in mortal combat yet again.
Up on the ridge, Fallon and Billings Dwight were agape with wonder.
I tell you
Said Billings.
that I better pick him off before he...
No.
Said Fallon, scrubbing his bluish jaw.
No murder in this deal yet.
They spurred forward and trotted down into the pasture. Somewhat confused, Gilhooly turned to meet them. He didn't know what to do with the lance and made a useless attempt to hide the 20-foot pine stick behind his back.
Hello.
Said Fallon cautiously. Gilhooly nodded. He did not like sheepmen, and he especially did not like Billings Dwight and Fallon. But just now he was red of face.
Yeah.
Said the late Sir Gilhooly.
Gilhooly, we come over to see if you was going to sell this place and give us that lease.
I ain't decided.
You mean you won't?
Well, I've been thinking it over. I've been thinking it over. It would be a damn shame to let sheep on this range. I got the only water for 25 miles around that's worth anything. All the cattlemen have to use my wells. And if there was sheep on this place, the cows wouldn't come within a mile of the troughs if they was dying of thirst. Alan, I think maybe it would be a mistake to let you have this place for any money.
Fallon stayed the black rage which began to rise within him.
You know what might happen to you, Gilhooly?
Maybe, but it would take more than a pair of buzzards to do it.
Fallon turned to his friend.
Come on, Billings. He's crazier than we thought.
As they rode away, they were conscious of Gilhooly's eyes upon their backs.
Think he's nutty?
Said Billings.
Nah.
Said Fallon, blue eyes narrow.
It's that Marianne Marlowe. That's my guess, and I think it's right.
Say,
Said Billings, pushing his shabby hat over his brow.
you don't want no murder, 'cause we gotta keep our noses clean, or we won't get Jack advanced.
Yep, no murder.
And if we can get Gilhooly's wells, we can buy out the rest of this range for a song, 'cause the Jack will be coming fast, and we can hire a young man army to keep the punchers off'n us.
Yeah. What you driving at?
Well, we gotta force Gilhooly, and we can't kill him. But there ain't no statute about kidnapping around here that I ever heard of. Only murder. And as Gilhooly is crazy about this Marianne Marlowe...
You don't have to draw pictures. If we do that, we can force Gilhooly to sell and shut his mouth afterwards by telling him the cattlemen are out to hang him for making the sale. That's a good idea. Don't you think so, Billings?
Billings Dwight was enough of a diplomat to let Fallon keep the change. He only nodded.
Now let's see. Next Sunday, she'll be at home from that school, and nobody will be around. We walk in there, say, we better get Stogie and Carson to come along to help. Gilhooly might walk in. He goes and sees her Sundays sometimes.
Yeah,
Said the diplomat Billings.
that's a good idea, Fallon.
It was Sunday morning, and the trees were singing, and the birds were shining, and the sun was in bloom, and Sir Gilhooly trotted along on Ye Calico toward Ye Towers of Marlow. As he went, he couched his lance and picked a sleeping rattler off a rock and threw the startled reptile about 90 feet away. A horned toad also got an aerial trip, and Gilhooly was pretty proud of his prowess. True, he was black and blue all over from his encounters with Brian Dubois Gilbert, and the tin pail was dented badly and was frying hot in the desert sun, but that made no difference. The red-bound copy of Ivanhoe was in his saddlebag, and Lady Mary Ann was due for a big and wondrous surprise. If this was being romantic, it was all right with Jigsaw Gilhooly. In the far distance he could see the house, and he trotted along for 3 miles or so, observing it closely to make certain that Mary Ann had neither family at home nor callers. Usually the Marlowes went to church over in Gunpowder Gulch, but Mary Ann did so much platform work during the week herself that she always took off Sunday as her day off. In jubilance at the final discovery that the place was deserted, Gilhooly spurred Calico to a trot and picked up a Gila monster with his lance. When the spiny gentleman hit, he sat up and stuck out his tongue and tromped around in a circle, showing indignation. Sir Gilhooly arrived before the clappered towers of Marlow, pointed his lance at the sizzling zenith, and cried,
Haste, Lady Mary Ann!
and then, more loudly,
How now?
the weather-beaten old house remained quiet. Gilhooly raised his voice and repeated, and then, in sudden doubt,
Hey, Mary Ann, it's me.
and still nothing happened. Puzzled, Gilhooly said,
You see anything of her, Calico?
Calico stirred and swished at the flies. Gilhooly anchored him to the wind and got down, thrusting his lance into the earth. He went into the house and stood while his eyes adjusted themselves to the dim interior. And then his glance lighted upon a tidy out of place. That would never happen in Mrs. Marlow's house. Again, there was some dust upon the floor, and he got down on his knees and picked up a torn bit of gingham. A flood of unreasoning terror took him. He jumped to his feet and stared all about him. He went swiftly to the kitchen, and there he found a chair overturned. Just outside the back door, he saw that the loose dust had been disturbed by long scrapes, as though somebody had been dragged unwillingly across it. Hurrying on this trail, he came to a gulch and found that many horses had been there. He tried to count them, but he was too excited for accurate tracking. Disaster had come to the Marlow ranch, and that was all that Gilhooly could register. He whistled excitedly for Calico, and the pony came tripping on his reins. Gilhooly mounted with a rush and spurred around the house. He caught up his lance as he passed it and then swerved back to catch the other trail. One horse had a notch gone from its shoe, and by this mark Gilhooly could follow on the trodden wagon trail.
It's Fallon,
said Gilhooly with the wind in his teeth.
It's that dirty sheep eater Fallon.
Beyond that he could not go. He accredited Fallon with no great strategy, but only remembered that Mary Ann Marlowe was a lovely girl, much in demand, but for some reason had always been wondrous to Gilhooly, giving most of her time to one Jakes Gilhooly. And because he had never been able to figure out why she was at all interested in him, he was now more anxious than ever to prove up. And as he rode, he pictured what would happen to Fallon. But Gilhooly completely forgot that he had left his 6-gun home because he needed the empty holster for a lance couch. He did not even have his Winchester. 6 men, probably. But the way Gilhooly felt, the 6 might as well have been 600. He balanced his lance and forgot to remember that a rifle bullet can reach 1,000 yards with fair accuracy, whereas his lance in the same length of time could reach about 30 feet. He had only read Ivanhoe, and so he did not know that chivalry had died as the bullet progressed. Fallon had a prospector's cabin perched precariously on a hillside above a dry stream bed. Above it, 5 horses filed along the steep trail, picking their careful ways until they reached the flat ground behind the sad shack. Fallon eased his thick bulk to earth and grinned at Mary Ann.
Now, if you don't mind, young lady, we'll take you in and leave you to sit and think for a spell.
You'd better watch out,
said Mary Ann, her brown eyes sparkling with anger.
If Jiggs tracks you to this place, he'll shoot that grin off your face and hang it on the wall.
Fallon appreciated the brave, if empty statement. He grinned more broadly.
Yeah, you didn't see what me and Billings saw last week. Your hunting lamb was out pushing a longhorn around with a long stick.
Mary Ann stared down at Fallon.
He was what?
You heard me. He's been chewing on loco weeds, sweetheart, and you got as much chance of having him pry you out of this with bullets as he has of saying no to me now. Now you get inside and be quiet, and I'll go over and see if Gilhooly will buy you back.
Mary Ann had never had any real reason to be sure of Gilhooly. He might or might not be dumb, and he might or might not be brave, but she wanted very badly to believe that he was bright and brave, and so she said that he was, in no uncertain terms.
I tell you that he'll take you apart. I can't browbeat him into doing anything he doesn't want to do. You want his range so you can get all the range for nothing when the next dry season comes. The Jiggs won't give in. Not him. You better start leaving the country before he hears about this outrage.
Big talk,
grinned Fallon, scrubbing his thick jaw and chuckling.
This afternoon, I think you'll find out just how brainy and brave this Gilhooly gent is. When he comes here, I'll be leading him, and he'll be as docile as a spring lamb.
Mary Ann wanted to disbelieve that, but she was almost certain it was true. Never in the career of Jiggs Gilhooly had anyone said that he was dangerous. And too late she knew that she had accepted his attention to the exclusion of others merely because his company was usually so restful after a hard week's teaching. True, she had wanted him to be romantic, but... Fallon hauled her down off the horse, pushed her into the cabin, and shut the door. Stogie and Carson were a little nervous, not liking anything too lawless, but not lacking in bravery.
You sure about this Gilhooly gent?
Said Stogie.
Yeah, course I'm sure.
He spat into the dust.
He's big and dumb.
How about this?
Said Carson, jerking his thumb at the cabin.
Her?
Said Fallon.
How about it, Billings?
Billings grinned.
Oh, by the time the country gets warmed up about this, we'll have Gilhooly's ranch. And as soon as we get that, we'll get all the money we need. It's been promised.
Stogie and Carson looked a little more convinced and got down. Fallon turned his horse around and then mounted.
Now, gents, you stay here and keep an eye peeled. I'm going to ride over to Gilhooly's and ask him for his signature. Ha! This is too easy.
Fallon spurred his Mustang up the trail and over the canyon edge to trot out across the sage-covered plain. He was in a very happy mood, and he had never been more certain of anything in his life. He rode about a mile before he saw the approaching horseman. Once in a while light flashed from bright metal, and suddenly Fallon knew that it was Gilhooly.
Huh?
Fallon told himself.
He come right along after all.
Gilhooly was coming, with all the speed the calico could thunder out of the road. He saw Fallon in the distance and without slackening pace narrowed the gap to 100 yards. Then he slowed to a walk, and Fallon slowed to a walk, and watchfully they approached each other.
Where's Mary Ann?
shouted Gilhooly. Fallon looked at the tin pail and the long pine stick and chuckled.
She's safe enough. Thanks for riding over, Gilhooly. You saved me the trouble of finding you.
What for?
Why, if you sell your place and the water rats, you get back Mary Ann. It's as easy as that.
They were less than 100 feet apart now, both coming to a halt.
I got it figured out right. If I sell, you'll block off the wells, and the next dry season you can buy the whole range for a song. The ranchers around here would be pretty mad at me, Fallon. It ain't a deal.
No? Well, my boy, it is a deal. But the price is only $1,000 now. If you don't sell, I can't promise what'll happen to Mary Ann Marlowe.
You getting hard-boiled?
Yeah?
Okay, mister. You've asked for it.
And before the startled Fallon could so much as blink, Gilhooly courted Calico and leveled the long lance and charged straight at Fallon. It was a terrifying thing to see that spear coming, but Fallon had plenty of time to draw, and draw he did. He snapped a quick and accurate shot at Gilhooly's thigh, and the puncher was almost jerked out of his saddle. But the lance was still in line and still coming. With a thump, the button slammed Fallon in the chest, picked him off his Mustang, and threw him to earth. The tip struck down. Doug saw it, and before Gilhooly could free it, the pine was snapped in two sections with such force that he, too, was hurled from the saddle. He hit rolling and ended up not 10 feet from Fallon, who was scrambling madly for his lost colt. Gilhooly dived, but he was too late. Fallon, bruised, blowing, and mad, towered above the puncher, colt leveled.
Funny, ain't you?
Snapped Fallon.
I oughta plug you.
Gilhooly sat still. His thigh was numb, and a hole in the batwing told him where the bullet had gone in.
Ain't so full of ginger now, are you?
Gilhooly glared through the slits of the pail and said nothing.
You changed your mind now?
Challenged Fallon.
What else can I do?
Said Gilhooly in a dull voice. Fallon relaxed a little and grinned. He looked around to see his own pony fleeing for home. Calico was standing by, and Fallon approached. Calico shied away, but Fallon got the rein.
You ain't gonna leave me here.
Said Gilhooly on the ground.
No.
Said Fallon. He mounted and Calico laid back his ears and bucked, but Fallon quartered him into docility and almost broke his jaw with the bit.
No.
Said Fallon, finishing his sentence.
But I ain't gonna walk. Come on, puncher. March.
But my leg.
Protested Gilhooly, trying to get up. Then he picked up a 5-foot section of the broken lance and pried himself from the earth. Using the pine as a crutch, he began to hitch himself along.
Faster. I ain't got all day.
Gilhooly hippity-hopped faster, head down.
This is too easy. I never did think you had any guts, Gilhooly. We'll go down to my place and sign, but I've cut the price. You don't get but $500. I can't pay you less without making it suspicious. Is that all right with you?
He added unnecessarily.
Yeah.
Said Gilhooly in a dull voice.
And after you get paid, you can leave the country. It won't be healthy for you. Understand?
Gilhooly didn't answer. He stumped dejectedly along, never turning to look at Fallon. They came at long last to the rim above the cabin. Gilhooly was played out from loss of blood in the hot sun, and it was all he could do to make it down the trail to the dilapidated shack. Mary Ann was looking out the window at him, and there was both pity and disappointment on her face. But there was no respect. For her, Gilhooly had passed out of the reach of any respect. He looked so ridiculous with that pail on his head, and she judged that his wound would not be serious, or else he could not walk at all. She felt pity, and pity is the pallbearer of love. Fallon got down. Stogie and Carson and Billings got up from a patch of shade and walked over, gazing amusedly at Gilhooly.
He tried to get tough, but I took all the fight out of him. creased his leg and you'd think he was killed. Ain't that right, Gilhooly?
Gilhooly looked at the ground through the slits in the pail and said nothing.
Go on inside,
said Fallon, booting Gilhooly. Gilhooly walked with difficulty through the door. There was a chair beside the table, and he sat down upon it, shoulders slumped in dejection. He would not look up to meet the contempt in Mary Ann's eyes. Fallon was joyously overbearing. He hauled out some printed forms, some ink, and a pen, and shoved them at Gilhooly.
The more I think about it, the more I think it would be a shame to spend money on you, Gilhooly. Suppose we make this for $10. Is that all right?
He challenged. Sorrowfully, Gilhooly nodded. His hand was shaking when he picked up the pen. He dipped it in the ink and tried to make a mark with it. Stogie and Carson and Billings were standing around grinning. The pen would not write.
I got another one,
stated Fallon with the air of a man of property. He turned around and rummaged in a box against the far wall. Gilhooly was still half leaning on his crutch. Stogie and Billings turned to watch Fallon's search, and suddenly the cabin exploded. Carson saw the stick whip level, and he dived for his gun. But before he could draw, hard pine hit him between the eyes, and he was slammed sideways against Stogie. Billings whirled with a warning yell and grabbed at his own gun. Whack! And his wrist was broken. With a backhand on the same sweep, Gilhooly smashed Stogie's nose all over his face. Fallon roared with anger and leaped up. Gilhooly struck at him, but Fallon had time to dodge. The pine stick sailed to crash into the door and drop outside. Gilhooly and Fallon collided in the middle of the room. Fallon had no time to draw. Gilhooly's fists were too swift, and Fallon's countering blows elicited yells of pain from him. His knuckles were smashed against the improvised cask. Billings was scrambling for a gun on the floor. Gilhooly leaped up and back, and his heels crunched down on Billings' fingers. Whirling Fallon around with a right, Gilhooly plucked the Colt from its holster and then, reversing its butt, began to get in some work. The cabin floor was covered with dust that now began to rise chokingly in the room. Through this fog of battle, Mary Ann, pressing the far wall with her back, saw a monster with a shining helmet take 4 men apart with such savage efficiency that it chilled her. Billings was out of it, a stumbling block on the floor. Stogie could not see for blood, and a final crack on the head spilled him into the ashes of the fireplace. Carson came to and came up fighting. He fired once, but he did not fire twice. Like a javelin thrower, Gilhooly lanced Carson out through the back window, and Carson started an avalanche as he went down the slope. Gilhooly's helmet had come off in the fray, and now, face streaked with sweat and eyes wild with battle, he advanced one final time upon the flailing fists of Fallon. There was a swift exchange of cracking blows, and suddenly Fallon collapsed over Billings. Methodically, Gilhooly reached down and yanked Fallon to his feet, only to knock him over again.
Don't kill him!
Gilhooly picked Fallon up and carried him to the water barrel and dumped him in it upside down. Then he set the bedraggled sheepman in what was left of the chair. Slowly, Fallon came around. He looked up and saw Gilhooly's set jaw and quailed.
Don't hit me again,
pleaded Fallon, fending off.
You're dumb. You are the dumbest man I have ever met, in fact.
How was I to know you wasn't hit?
Whined Fallon.
You wasn't square.
I'm being square now,
said the awful specter of fury which was Gilhooly.
You want my place. Well, I'm going to sell you my land, see? I'm going to sell you land, and it's going to cost you $1,500.
You'll sell?
Gaped Fallon. Gilhooly snatched the forms to him and grabbed the pen. He scrawled names and locations onto the dotted lines and then sighed at the bottom. He reversed the paper and handed the pen. Fallon read, and what he read he thought must be distorted by his swelling eyes.
But you're only selling me 1 acre. You're selling me 1 acre on the driest part of your land. You can't do this. I won't.
Gilhooly's voice was quiet, but Gilhooly's voice went through Fallon's head like a bullet.
Sign it and get your money.
Fallon looked at Gilhooly's face, and then Fallon signed. He stumbled over to the box against the back wall and dug out an iron container. Dolefully, he counted the contents and found $1,545. Gilhooly snapped it out of his hands.
$45 is rent on my horse. Now get out of here. Kick some life into those gents and travel. And don't never come near the Painted Buttes country no more.
He collected the guns and strung them on a piece of wire and went outside to hook them over Calico's horn. Mary Ann was watching him with wide eyes. He came back, and suddenly he picked her up and carried her out and put her on Carson's sorrel. The four were collected now. They mounted, watching Gilhooly for any swift move, and then, almost gladly, they rode up the trail and out of sight.
Oh, Jiggs, I never saw anything so wonderful in my life. To fool them in thinking that you were wounded and then beating them up and getting $1,545.
I didn't fool them.
Said Gilhooly, tenderly regarding his leg.
But, you say, you know that guy Ivanhoe?
Yes, Jiggs?
He was a fake.
What?
Yeah. Why the dickens didn't you tell me that being romantic was just beating up guys with your bare fist? You saved me a pile of trouble.